Dilek Tuna, you're watching A News. Let's see the top stories this hour. A new US-backed ceasefire agreement has been reached between Israel and Lebanon after months of cross-border conflict. One person was killed and 63 others injured in an Iranian attack on Kuwait airport as US House votes to stop the war. And Russia and Ukraine exchange a new wave of long-range strikes as Ukrainian President Zelensky says he's ready to meet Vladimir Putin. The United States says Israel and Lebanon have agreed to a US-mediated ceasefire subject to conditions, including a halt to Hezbollah attacks. The deal follows deadly Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon and rocket fire into northern Israel. Despite the announcement, both sides report continued cross-border attacks.
The United States has announced that Israel and Lebanon have agreed to implement a ceasefire. The US State Department said the agreement is contingent on a complete halt to attacks by the Iran-backed armed group Hezbollah, along with several other conditions.
Lebanon and Israel.
The agreement comes after Israeli strikes killed at least 9 people in southern Lebanon on Wednesday. Hezbollah also fired rockets into northern Israel, putting a fragile truce agreed in April under pressure. According to the agreement, Hezbollah operatives must leave the area between the Litani River and the Israeli border that is currently under Israeli control in southern Lebanon. Israel's ambassador to the United States, Yechiel Leiter, said he was confident the ceasefire would hold, describing it as a chance to break decades of recurring violence along the border.
Hezbollah is going to understand that there is now an agreement between Israel and Lebanon, backed by the United States. The pilot zone project will be guided by the United States. Special units in the Lebanese army will take control of various areas and gradually spread out throughout the south, so we don't go into another pattern where Israel leaves, Hezbollah comes back, and we go through the same thing for the past 40 years. We are no longer going into a pattern of negotiating ceasefires where Israel leaves, Hezbollah comes back, and we go back to the same nonsense. This is stopped. Everybody understands that it has to stop. And we are full of hope that this time it will succeed.
A member of Hezbollah's political council, Mahmoud Kamati, told the BBC that the group does not recognize the Washington talks and would not be bound by their decisions. Meanwhile, the State Department said all parties agreed that the future relationship between Israel and Lebanon must be decided by the two sovereign governments, rejecting outside interference. Israel and Lebanon are due to meet again on June 22nd for further talks aimed at reaching a comprehensive agreement. Despite the announcement, tensions remain high. Israel's military said it intercepted a drone and 2 projectiles crossing the border, while Hezbollah said it had targeted a gathering of Israeli troops. Before the deal was announced, Israeli leaders warned they would resume strikes on Beirut's southern suburbs if attacks on northern Israel continued.
US President Donald Trump says talks with Iran could produce progress within days, suggesting a possible deal as early as the weekend. Tehran, however, says there's been no tangible breakthrough in the negotiations. The comments come as renewed Gulf hostilities strain a fragile ceasefire. Here's more.
Is it possible to get to a deal with Iran?
US President Donald Trump says talks with Iran could produce progress within days. But Tehran says there has been no breakthrough as renewed fighting in the Gulf strains a fragile ceasefire.
This is, as you probably have been
Speaking
watching.
on Wednesday, Trump said negotiations were going very well and suggested a deal could come as soon as the weekend.
The negotiation itself has gone very well, actually. Very well.
Mr. President,
It could happen. I mean, if it happens, and it might not happen, who knows? But if it happens, it could happen like over the weekend.
Trump said Washington expected to secure Iran's enriched uranium stockpile under any deal and wanted to avoid putting US personnel at risk. Previously, on Tuesday, he also said that indirect talks were still going on continuously, denying Iranian state media reports that Tehran had suspended negotiations over Israel's war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, while adding that Iran's supreme leader remained involved in the talks and was still giving final approval. Asked whether he would meet him, Trump said they would probably meet at some point. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi gave a more cautious view on Wednesday, saying there had been no tangible progress, though communication channels remained open. The uncertainty comes as Gulf hostilities flare again. Kuwait said on Wednesday that an Iranian missile and drone attack hit Kuwait International Airport, killing one person and injuring more than 60 others. Flights were suspended after the attack damaged airport facilities and diplomatic missions. Kuwaiti authorities released footage they said showed an Iranian drone crashing into the airport. Iran's Revolutionary Guards denied targeting the airport and blamed the damage on failed US interceptor missiles. The US military rejected that account and said Iranian drones deliberately targeted the airport. The US military also carried out strikes near the Strait of Hormuz on Wednesday, where tensions have disrupted shipping and pushed oil prices higher. In a post on X, Araghchi said Iran's armed forces were carrying out self-defense strikes and warned that any hostile act would draw an immediate, decisive response.
Iran condemned the recent US attacks on its tanker as well as a telecom site on a Persian Gulf island, promising retaliation as its navy said targeted a US command and control destroyer in the Sea of Oman amid stalled ceasefire talks between Tehran and Washington. Tuashir Liliu brings more.
Iran's foreign ministry has strongly condemned the US attacks on an Iranian tanker and a telecommunication tower on the Qeshm Island in the Persian Gulf, defending Tehran's retaliatory response in self-defense. In a statement on Wednesday, the ministry said Iran will use all its might to counter aggressive acts, including by targeting the origin and source of attacks, in a bid to exercise its inherent right to defend Iran's territorial integrity and national sovereignty. In the latest exchange of attacks between Iranian and US militaries, Iran's Navy said it targeted a US warship carrying out command and control of the strikes on the Iranian assets late on Wednesday in the Sea of Oman. According to the local media, the Navy said that following the violation of Iran's regulations for transit across the Strait of Hormuz and the US attacks on the Iranian commercial vessels, it targeted a command and control site aboard a warship in the Sea of Oman. Meantime, the Revolutionary Guards IRGC spokesman, 2nd Brigadier General Hossein Mohebbi, said in a statement that its airspace force did not strike at the Kuwait airport, saying the destruction was caused by a failed US Patriot missile. In a statement carried by the Sepah News website, the general said the destruction at the airport was caused by an error in the US Patriot missiles, which landed on the terminal after failing to intercept Iranian projectiles. Meantime, at the diplomatic front, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, in an interview with Al Mayadeen satellite TV, confirmed that the mediated exchanges between Tehran and Washington are continuing, but without a tangible progress in the ceasefire talks. Tuashir Liliu, reporting from Tehran for A News.
Staying on this topic, the United Nations says that Secretary General Antonio Guterres is alarmed by reported overnight Iranian strikes on Kuwait and Bahrain, as well as overnight exchanges of fire between the US and Iran.
I can tell you the Secretary General is alarmed by the reported exchange of fire overnight between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran, and also by reports that the Islamic Republic of Iran has targeted Kuwait and Bahrain. He is deeply troubled by the reports of civilian casualties. The Secretary General calls on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to avoid any further escalation that risk to undermine ongoing diplomatic efforts. The sovereignty and the territorial integrity of all countries must be fully respected. The Secretary General reaffirms his full support for all ongoing mediation efforts, including those led by Pakistan, and urges all parties to engage constructively and in good faith with diplomatic initiatives. And turning to
the US House of Representatives has approved a resolution aimed at blocking President Donald Trump from continuing military action against Iran without congressional approval. The House voted 215 to 208 on Wednesday, with 4 Republicans joining Democrats in support of the measure. The resolution directs Trump to withdraw US forces from hostilities involving Iran unless Congress declares war or authorizes the use of military force. The measure must still pass the Senate to take effect.
House Concurrent Resolution 86. Concurrent resolution directing the President pursuant to Section 5C of the War Powers Resolution to remove United States armed forces from hostilities with Iran.
Military pressures mounting on both sides of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, but amid a new wave of long-range strikes, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's ready to meet Russian leader Vladimir Putin immediately in a bid to end the war.
Fresh attacks have been reported by both Russia and Ukraine, with each side claiming strikes on strategic military and energy-related targets. Russia's defense ministry says its forces hit Ukrainian drone facilities, energy infrastructure and troop positions, while air defense units intercepted more than 700 drones along with several Western-supplied weapons. Meanwhile, Ukraine says it carried out strikes against key Russian facilities, including port infrastructure, an oil terminal in St. Petersburg, and a factory linked to the production of precision-guided weapons. The latest exchange highlights the growing reach of long-range attacks, with both sides increasingly targeting sites far from the front lines. Amid the escalation, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has renewed his call for direct talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Zelensky said he is ready for an immediate meeting, arguing that leader-to-leader dialogue could help accelerate efforts to end the war. He also stressed that Ukraine would not wait for progress on other international issues before pursuing negotiations aimed at bringing the conflict to a close. The developments come at a time when military pressure and diplomatic efforts continue to unfold in parallel, with no sign yet of a breakthrough in the more than 3-year-long war.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says an update is expected soon on $400 million in Ukraine war funding approved by Congress, but delayed at the Department of Defense. Speaking to a Senate subcommittee on Wednesday, Rubio also warned that the risk of escalation in the Ukraine-Russia war is growing.
And there were a couple of stops along the way that unfortunately got tied up a little bit. But I've seen it not as Secretary of State. I've seen the interagency as National Security Advisor. And it's something that I think we'll have news on fairly soon.
The US Pentagon is facing growing budget pressure as rising fuel costs add to a multi-billion-dollar shortfall. That's according to ABC News. Defense Department records cited in the report show the average fuel price paid by the military rose by nearly 27% between October and April. The increase could add more than $1 billion in unplanned costs this year for aircraft, tanks and other equipment. ABC News says the US Army has cut back on training as it faces a $4 to $6 billion shortfall through the rest of the fiscal year, driven partly by the Iran war and increased border missions. A one-day general strike disrupted services across Portugal on Wednesday. It marked the second time in 6 months that unions have protested against the government's labour reform plans. Here's Anita Sharma with more from the Netherlands.
Welcome to This Day in Europe. And disruption in Portugal due to a nationwide general strike over controversial labour reforms that unions say would roll back decades of worker protections. Trains were halted, hundreds of flights cancelled, schools closed, and hospitals postponed non-urgent procedures. This as workers across transport, education, and healthcare joined the walkout. Portugal's state railway suspended long-distance services, Lisbon's metro shut down, and flagship carrier TAP operated just a fraction of its normal scheduled flights. The strike was called by Portugal's largest labor confederation, CGTP, to protest a government-backed overhaul of more than 100 articles of the country's labor code. The center-right minority government argues the reforms are necessary to boost productivity and economic growth after negotiations with unions collapsed. But unions argue the changes would make dismissals easier, expand outsourcing, weaken strike protections, and increase job insecurity, particularly for younger workers. Critics say employees could face longer working weeks with fewer safeguards, while employers would gain greater flexibility to replace staff with outsourced labor. Labor Minister Maria de Rosario Ramalho downplayed the impact, insisting most private sector workers remained on the job and that the broader economy continued to function. The strike is the second nationwide shutdown in 6 months' time and highlights a growing political battle over the future of work in Portugal. With the government expected to rely on support from the far-right Chega party to pass the reforms, the confrontation between labor unions and Lisbon appears far from over. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
The World Health Organization says the Ebola response in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda is improving, but major gaps remain as health teams race to contain the outbreak.
The World Health Organization says Ebola cases have risen in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Uganda, but response efforts are beginning to catch up after a rapid early spread. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said on Wednesday that the DRC had confirmed 344 cases, including 60 deaths, across 24 health zones in 3 provinces. Uganda has reported 15 confirmed cases, including 1 death. The outbreak is caused by the Bundibugyo strain of the Ebola virus. Tedros said 6 patients in the DRC and 2 in Uganda had recovered and been discharged from hospital. But the WHO warned that major challenges remain, including delays in laboratory confirmation, weak contact tracing, travel restrictions affecting supplies, and community mistrust. The agency said only about 45% of close contacts are currently being traced, far below the more than 90% needed to control the spread. Tedros said early investigations suggest the outbreak may have begun as far back as January, but the priority now is to contain it quickly. The WHO says at least $115 million will be needed over the next 3 months, with about 35% of that funding currently secured. The agency's risk assessment remains very high at the national level, high at the regional level, and low globally.
Canada's Vancouver is getting ready for the FIFA World Cup 2026 with some big and eye-catching displays across the city. City Science World has been transformed into the beautiful Dome, a giant version of the tournament's official match ball. The installation covers the entire dome with more than 130 custom panels. The ball's design represents the 3 host nations, Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Meanwhile, Grouse Mountain has unveiled a massive Canadian flag on its ski slope, measuring 160 metres long. It's being promoted as a record-breaking display and is expected to become a major attraction as more than 300,000 visitors travel to the region during the World Cup. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll discuss the latest developments involving Iran, the US, and the wider implications for Gulf security. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Tensions in the Gulf have escalated further after Iran launched more than 30 missiles and drones toward Bahrain and Kuwait, describing the attacks as retaliation for US strikes on Iranian coastal facilities. According to reports, 1 person died and dozens were injured in Kuwait airport, raising concerns that the conflict is spreading to new areas and involving more regional countries. Now, the developments come as US President Donald Trump insists that the ongoing bombing campaign has been sufficiently successful and that American boots on the ground are not required, despite continuing Iranian military activity across the region. Let's bring in our guest now. Klaus Jurgens joins us. He's a political analyst with Economy First Limited from London, UK. Klaus, welcome to the program.
Thanks, dear Lekanam, for having me. Thank you.
Now, does the fact that Iran can still launch missiles and drones at Kuwait and Bahrain months into this campaign prove that air power alone can't achieve US goals?
Well, I think we have to be very careful here. Now, air power is one option. Boots on the ground, I'm sure we will come back to that point in a minute. I would not be surprised if Donald Trump eventually refrains from having too many or boots on the ground, because we spoke about this before. He always said, "Make America great again." But I don't think that his own electorate actually would like to see, God forbid, body bags coming home with dead soldiers. And I think he will learn a lesson that diplomacy is the only way out. But yes, I fully agree, air power might not be enough, because coming back to your first point, some observers are quite interestingly saying, amazed, that Iran still has the capabilities of striking in the region. So some military foresight experts in Western countries, or let's put it like this, from Israel all the way to Washington and beyond, they might have got this one wrong. I think Iran has more capabilities than we actually think it has.
Mm-hmm. Now, even though they aren't part of this conflict, Bahrain and Kuwait are continuing to be impacted. How concerned should other Gulf countries be about being pulled into this conflict?
I think Bahrain and Kuwait are a special case because Iran, the administration, the government issued a statement, not only one but more, saying they want to fight the colonial powers. And by that, basically, they mean the United States of America. And Bahrain and Kuwait, I think, were not targeted by coincidence. Kuwait International Airport, one terminal, as we all know, and then Bahrain, the Fifth Fleet, if I'm not mistaken, of the United States, and one person lost their lives and over 60 injured. I think Iran is trying to making sure that any peace agreement in the region would make sure that at least what Iran would say, the influence of American bases is somehow reduced or limited. And this should be part of a peace agreement. And what would Washington accept? What could Iran accept? Diplomacy is the only way forward. I am not thinking that other nations in the region would be targeted by Iran, to be honest. Let's mention Qatar as one example. I don't think so. Bahrain, I think for historical reasons, and Kuwait for strategic reasons. But as the Iranians said, it is the colonial dimension they want to end. I'm not taking sides here. I'm just commenting on what I heard from Iran and Washington.
Mm-hmm. Now, leaders often say, as Trump's been saying, there will be no boots on the ground right up until circumstances change. Now, what developments would force Washington to reconsider that position?
Honestly, I don't think that President Trump would ever reconsider that decision. Let's go back to his election campaign, Make America Great Again. I mentioned this before. Now, he was focusing on domestic issues, not on foreign policies. Then all of a sudden, he became a peacemaker. Think about the agreement between your fine nation and Armenia, brokered by and in Washington. I think this is the legacy Donald Trump would rather want to see, not a warmonger, but a peace broker, as difficult as it is. So, no, I do not expect large numbers, maybe not at all, numbers, the boots on the ground. Rather, I think Washington would then say, look, our efforts did not work, but we don't want full-scale war. We don't want to send our soldiers onto the territory. What next can be done? And this brings me back to my point. There must be peace negotiations. And why don't we bring in the United Nations?
Now, Klaus, the campaign has been continuing for far longer than what Washington and Tel Aviv had anticipated in the beginning, as it's been voiced by both sides. Is Washington seeking now to deter Iran, degrade its capabilities, or fundamentally change its regional behavior? These are very different strategic goals.
I think the key would be to degrade the capabilities. We mentioned this before. Many observers are really puzzled that Iran still has the military and the weaponry power actually to strike in the region. I think Washington knows it cannot recreate an entire Middle East or the Gulf region by making a phone call from Washington to a number of capitals. These days are over. And Iran will always be there. I mentioned this before. Someone once said, a German politician, that there will never be a world without Russia. Would there ever be a world without Iran? I think this is going one step too far. But no one should risk at disintegrating or dismembering Iran. That would lead to enormous catastrophes and bloodshed. And I hope the advisors in Donald Trump's cabinet tell him exactly that. Yes, you must degrade, you must stop capabilities, but at some stage, as difficult as it might be, you have to sit down at a negotiating table. And last not least, I think really this is what the American electorate wants, definitely in the wake of the November elections.
Okay, one final question, Klaus. Iran continues threatening action around the Strait of Hormuz. How seriously should markets and governments treat those warnings?
Of course, serious. Now, if you talk about hard power or soft power or smart power, of course, the leaders in Iran, although often belittled by Western powers as not having the gist or the political clout to do anything of any enormous impact on the global stage. The Strait of Hormuz, of course, is of absolutely vital importance here. And listen to, now we are in London. Now, if you think about London insurance companies who simply say we cannot insure the risk anymore, and America is a globalist, capitalist leading power, eventually money goes where money comes from. I think there could be a very positive push that even shipping companies, not only China, but many other nations simply say, look, we want to have a negotiation with you. We must end the bloodshed and potential bloodshed in the Gulf region. We want to have a free passage of the Strait of Hormuz. What are your conditions? And then Iran will say, these are our conditions. And other countries will say, these are our conditions. Is it only America and Iran? No. Last point, promised Illich. I think why not give the United Nations, as badly managed as they are sometimes, a closer overview of the peace negotiations, not only between two countries, but perhaps the wider world to make it last. But yes, the Strait of Hormuz of absolute vital importance, and Iran and Tehran are playing a very, very clever political card here.
Klaus, as always, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. Thank you for your insights and analysis today.
Thank you very much for having me. Absolute pleasure.
Now we'll take a break. When we return, we'll take a look at the key stories shaping the region. Welcome back to A News, and now we turn to our regional stories. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met with his South Korean counterpart Cho Hyun in Seoul on Thursday. The meeting took place during Fidan's visit to South Korea. No further details on the talks were immediately available. According to ministry sources, discussions are expected to focus on strengthening bilateral ties. Turkey is pushing ahead with a series of ambitious transport and logistics projects aimed at strengthening its role as a regional trade and energy hub. Transport Minister Abdulkadir Uraloğlu says Ankara plans to modernize the historic Hejaz Railway and eventually extend it to Oman, while also advancing major corridor projects linking Turkey to Iraq, the Gulf and the South Caucasus. Here are the details from Adam Morrow in Istanbul.
Turkey is laying out an increasingly expansive vision for regional connectivity, with Transport Minister Abdulkadir Uraloğlu unveiling plans that stretch from the Gulf to the Caucasus. Speaking to state media on Wednesday, Uraloğlu said Ankara intends to modernize the historic Hejaz Railway and extend it southward to Oman, creating what he described as an alternative transportation route to the Strait of Hormuz. The original Hejaz Railway, built during the Ottoman era in the early 20th century, connected Damascus with Medina and was designed to facilitate travel and trade across the region. Uraloğlu said the scheme was part of a broader effort to strengthen overland connectivity at a time when maritime routes, particularly around the Gulf, face growing geopolitical uncertainty. He also announced that the design phase of the development road project had been completed. That initiative aims to create a roughly 1,200-kilometer transport corridor linking Iraq's southern city of Basra with the Turkish border through a network of railways, highways, and logistics hubs. Ankara views the project as a strategic alternative to traditional maritime trade routes and as a means of increasing trade flows between Asia, the Gulf, and Europe. The transport minister also highlighted progress on the Zangezur corridor, which would link mainland Azerbaijan with its Nakhchivan exclave via Armenia before continuing into eastern Turkey. According to Uraloğlu, construction has already begun on the 224-kilometer Kars-Iğdır-Arlik-Dilucu railway line, which forms part of Turkey's section of the route. Together, the projects reflect Ankara's broader ambition to position Turkey as a central transport and logistics gateway linking Europe, the Caucasus, Central Asia, and the Gulf. They also reflect mounting concern about the security of regional transit routes, which President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has described as an issue of national security amid ongoing geopolitical tensions across the wider region. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
As Armenia prepares for parliamentary elections on the 7th of June, analysts are increasingly pointing to the role of regional politics in shaping the campaign. Several international publications say Azerbaijan has become a key reference point in debates over security, peace, and the country's future direction.
With Armenia's parliamentary elections just days away, attention is focusing not only on domestic issues but also on the country's relationship with neighbouring Azerbaijan. Several international analysts and media outlets have highlighted the issue in recent weeks. Writing in Forbes, Russian political analyst Sergei Markadonov argued that regional dynamics have shifted in Azerbaijan's favour following recent developments in the South Caucasus. Italy's Ore 12 publication said Armenia currently lacks a clear military guarantor, pointing to the limited role of international security mechanisms in the region. Meanwhile, Romania's Cotidianul newspaper linked the election campaign directly to the unfinished peace process between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The publication noted that a final peace agreement has yet to be signed and said constitutional reform remains a point of discussion between the two sides. The debate has also featured prominently inside Armenia. Opposition figures have accused Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's government of making excessive concessions to Baku, while supporters of normalization argue that a lasting peace agreement could bring greater stability and economic opportunities. As campaigning enters its final stage, the future of Armenia's relationship with Azerbaijan is emerging as one of the key issues influencing political debate ahead of the June 7th vote.
Armenia and the United States have formally signed a framework agreement on the trip route. Armenian Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan announced the signing during a live broadcast on the Foreign Ministry's social media page. He said the document had already been endorsed by US Secretary of State Marco Rubio before he added his signature. The agreement was initially approved by both sides at Yerevan's Zvartnots International Airport on the 26th of May, with officials promising a formal signing in the near future. The deal marks a new step in cooperation between Yerevan and Washington. Easing transit and customs procedures, improving logistics and addressing challenges faced by traders were among the key issues discussed during recent talks between Afghan and Uzbek officials. Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
Afghanistan and Uzbekistan are looking to strengthen trade, transport and economic cooperation. Sayyid Karim Hashimi, the chairman of the Afghanistan Chamber of Commerce and Investment, met with the chairman of Uzbekistan's Chamber of Commerce and Industry. During the meeting, both sides discussed boosting trade, improving transit and customs facilitation. According to the Afghanistan Chamber of Commerce and Investment, the two sides also spoke about challenges facing traders and the need for practical solutions. Later, Hashimi also held talks with Uzbekistan's Minister of Transport and Railways. That meeting focused on transit facilities, transport cooperation, logistics infrastructure, and measures to support Afghan traders and exporters. The Afghan delegation has travelled to Uzbekistan to attend the second Termiz International Conference and is expected to hold several business meetings on the sidelines of the event. Officials from the chamber say continued cooperation with Uzbekistan is important for boosting bilateral trade, improving regional connectivity and strengthening economic relations between the two countries. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
A meeting in Washington between US Secretary of State and Turkmenistan's Foreign Minister has brought new attention to energy and transport routes between Central Asia and Europe. Here's more.
Following talks in Washington on May 29th, the United States voiced support for diversifying Turkmenistan's natural gas exports through trans-Caspian routes connecting Central Asia with Europe. The proposal, which would transport Turkmen gas across the Caspian Sea and onward through the South Caucasus, has been under discussion for more than 2 decades but has yet to move beyond the planning stage. While no concrete agreements were announced, analysts say the meeting could signal renewed US interest in Central Asia at a time when competition over energy, transport and trade corridors is growing across Eurasia. According to experts, Washington's support for the Trans-Caspian route reflects broader efforts to strengthen connections between Central Asia and Europe and expand alternatives to infrastructure networks dominated by Russia and China. Analysts note that Turkmenistan could benefit from greater export diversification. The country's gas exports are currently heavily focused on the Chinese market. Some observers believe the development of alternative transit routes could gradually reduce Russia's role as the primary gateway for Central Asian exports to European markets. Others point out that Moscow's influence in the region extends beyond energy through economic, cultural and historical ties. Azerbaijan is expected to play a central role if the project moves forward. Existing pipelines and transport infrastructure already make it a key corridor between Asia and Europe. Despite renewed political support, experts warn that major challenges remain. These include financing costs, commercial viability, infrastructure upgrades, and long-term demand guarantees. Analysts say the Washington meeting is an important political signal, but not a decision to begin construction. It shows that Central Asia is once again becoming a focus of US geopolitical and energy strategy.
For the first time in its history, Kyrgyzstan has been elected to the United Nations Security Council, securing a permanent seat for the 2027-28 term. The decision was made by the UN General Assembly, where Kyrgyzstan won the final round of voting with 142 votes, defeating the Philippines. Beginning on the 1st of January 2027, Kyrgyzstan will join Austria, Portugal, Zimbabwe and Trinidad and Tobago as non-permanent members of the Security Council. The election marks a significant diplomatic milestone for Kyrgyzstan, giving the Central Asian nation a seat at the UN's most powerful decision-making body on international peace and security. And Kazakhstan is looking to strengthen trade and transport links with Europe. During a visit to Astana by Cypriot President Nikos Christodoulides, President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev invited Cyprus to join the Trans-Caspian transport route, also known as the Middle Corridor. The talks focused on trade, logistics and investment. Our correspondent from Almaty has the details.
Kazakhstan has invited Cyprus to take part in the development of the Trans-Caspian international transport route. President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev made the proposal following talks with the Cypriot President Nikos Christodoulides in Astana. Kazakhstan sees Cyprus, a major maritime hub in the region, as a potential partner in strengthening the so-called Middle Corridor by connecting Kazakhstan's overland transport network with the Mediterranean shipping routes. Officials say the move could open new trade opportunities linking Central Asia, the Caspian region and Europe. The visit is already being described as historic. It marks the first official visit by a president of Cyprus to Kazakhstan since diplomatic ties between the two countries were established. Following the talks, both leaders signaled plans to deepen political and economic cooperation. President Tokayev described Cyprus as one of Kazakhstan's reliable and important partners in Europe, noting that bilateral ties have expanded in recent years through growing diplomatic and business engagement. He also called it symbolic that the first direct flight between the two countries was launched during the Cypriot president's first visit to Astana. Economic cooperation was high on the agenda. The two sides discussed expanding trade, increasing investment and strengthening business ties. Tokayev proposed a roadmap for economic cooperation through 2028 and put forward plans for an intergovernmental commission and a joint business council. And according to the Kazakh presidency, more than 400 companies with Cypriot capital are currently operating in Kazakhstan, with around 30 registered at the Astana International Financial Center. The visit concluded with the signing of 5 intergovernmental memorandums and agreements. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
After the break, we'll discuss growing tensions between Russia and Armenia and what they could mean for the wider South Caucasus. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. We now shift our focus to a regional story for discussion. Russia has sharply criticised Armenia's growing engagement with Western partners, with Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova arguing that Yerevan's current course is increasingly leading to actions that undermine Russian interests. The comments follow recent visits and agreements involving the US and Armenia, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio's trip to Yerevan and growing cooperation on regional connectivity initiatives. The remarks underline growing tensions between Moscow and Yerevan as Armenia continues seeking to diversify its international partnerships while remaining economically and geographically tied to Russia. Let's bring in our guest now. Associate Professor Zaur Gasimov joins us from Turkish-German University, Istanbul, Turkey. Professor, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your invitation.
Now, Moscow says Armenia's actions are going against Russian interests. What do you think about how sternly Russia's talking to Armenia right now?
Well, Russia has been observing actually since several years that Armenia somehow sways off from the former political course and gets closer with transatlantic structures in general, and especially with the European Union. And Yerevan started actually the integration process, which is a very, very broad one, and that would take years. But at least the ruling elites and also a big segment of Armenian society are eager to deepen the political dialogue with European Union, and that is, of course, at odds with Moscow.
Okay. Now, you mentioned there it's leaning more towards Armenia, leaning more towards transatlantic structures. And by bringing up Ukraine, Russia bringing up Ukraine, whenever countries lean toward Western institutions, is Moscow sending a hidden warning to Armenia as well?
Of course. Russia took actually several measures also in the past months to augment the pressure on Pashinyan government, on sending messages also to Armenian society, to other players within Armenian politics, that Moscow would increase strenuously increase the fees for fossil exports, Armenia is still dependent on, and also it's about its membership in Russia-led organizations, economic and political ones. But in the same time, the time goes, and there are several days until the parliamentary election in Armenia. And the statement of Zakharova shows in the same time also certain weaknesses in Russian position, that the steps and measures already taken by the Russian government are seemingly not sufficient in order to incline Pashinyan or to make him change the course.
Now, Zakharova specifically linked her criticism to Secretary of State Marco Rubio's visit. Why does Washington's growing engagement with Armenia concern Moscow so much?
Well, Russia perceives the integration with the European Union somehow inseparably from the integration of this or another country with NATO. So Russia observes that in really one context, as it was the case with many East European nations. So Russia is very, very opponent to that, to any kind of rapprochement between Yerevan or any other country of the former Soviet geography towards Brussels, but even more towards NATO. And actually, the example which was really articulated by Zakharova, comparing the situation in present-day Armenia somehow with that of Ukraine, that the rapprochement with European Union can outcome in chaos is a very strong actual argument, and is also a quite crucial one.
And Professor, how does Azerbaijan fit into this developing geopolitical picture, especially given its growing role in connectivity, energy and regional diplomacy?
Well, the development of Armenian-Azerbaijani ties are an integral part of the peace process, which integrates, forges the dialogue between two nations, and in the same time, it forges the regional integration on the level of Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. And by doing so, unwillingly, that combines these two nations, these two countries, also with a bigger hemisphere, with the Western countries, and with Turkey, which is a member of NATO, and even beyond. So that would play also a huge role on the acceleration of any kind of contacts between Europe and Central Asia. So that is perceived in Russia, and by the way, not only in Russia, but also in Iran, as a certain westernization of the regional dynamics.
And do you read this as Russia warning Armenia that it will face consequences for getting too close to the West?
Well, definitely yes. So it is articulated as a warning. Another question is whether Russia is able to impact the situation radically or not. So that is a big question, and at the moment we can only speculate. So we will see that in a couple of days. But what is definitely the case, that Russia would continue to undertake even more radical steps in order to have an impact on Pashinyan and also on electional behavior of Armenian society.
And from Armenia's perspective, Professor, do you think Armenia's current strategy is part of a larger trend where smaller states build multiple partnerships rather than depending on one superpower?
For Armenia, it's actually not the case. What we observe in Armenian case, it's not the diversification somehow of the its relations. It's a very, very clear sway and reshuffle of the focus. So the focus was definitely 10 years ago on its very close cooperation with Russia and with Iran. And what we see in the time of Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan is Armenia maintains the ties with Russia and with Iran, continues to cooperate with both in a military field, but in the same time heavily deepened the relations with the United States and with European Union, and also as the aftermath of the Second Karabakh War also took up and deepened its dialogue with Baku.
Professor Zargasimov, thank you so much for your insights and analysis today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
And that's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for all the latest updates.